Bonjour, mes amis. C'est Jeff Diamond de la YouTube à Cutter Historical pour la vidéo de la 10e jour Montreal Grande. L'histoire de l'Expo, c'est bon. Ça, c'est 1969 à 2004, 35 ans de la Ligue baseball majeure. Et le grand moment en santé de 1981, 1994 et le balancement downfall de l'expo. Okay, so we are going to be looking at the top 10 Montreal Expo players of all time. Of course, you know, my attempts to be bilingual are not always the best. But anyhow, this is a great moment for everybody. And we talked about the top 10 Montreal Expo moments last time. Now we're going to be talking about the top 10 Montreal Expo players of all time. And some of them did have a good career with the Expos, but better on other teams. I kind of tried to make sure that the players that had a better career for the Expos would be featured high. There's one guy that definitely is a legend, a legendary Canadian. He's on this list, but he's low because his power numbers were not really with Montreal, they were with another team. So here we go. Notice number 10, the Troisième but, third base, Tim Wallach. Tim Wallach was a presence at third base in the 80s and 90s for the Expos before being traded to the Dodgers. But Tim Wallach was great. He was a steady presence, 5-time All-Star at that position, 3-time Gold Glove winner, and, you know, he was basically Montreal's best player in the mid-80s because Montreal had this great run from 1979 to 1982, which was one of the best four-year streaks without getting to a World Series. Because 79, they lost on the final weekend of the season to Pittsburgh for the division. 1980, they had a 3-game series against Philly. That's 2 out of 3, and whoever won that thing actually ended up winning the division. And Philly did it on the Saturday with a Michael Jack Schmidt 11th inning home run. And then came 1981 when they won the NL East in a divisional series against the Phillies, but couldn't finish it off the Dodgers thanks to one Rick Monday being a bastard. 82, they hosted the All-Star game. They were close, but in the East, they came close. But yeah. So Tim Wallach was a good player. Not enough. Number 9. Le Lanceur pitcher Dennis El Presidente Martinez. Dennis Martinez's story was pretty impressive. Yes, we all know about his perfect game, June 28th, 1991, and I made that my number one Expo moment of all time. I mean, throwing a perfect game in baseball is hard. I mean, a no-hitter is one thing, but a perfect game with nobody on getting on base for the Dodgers, that's amazing. Especially when the Expos had that big scoreless streak and couldn't win the game. And that was the 91 season in which that concrete beam ruined the Expo season, and they had to play all their home games on the road in September. Nevertheless, Dennis Martinez was a great pitcher. He played for Nicaragua in the Junior World Series and then had some alcohol problems meeting the scouts, and that led to his alcoholism as a member of the Baltimore Orioles. Yes, he won a ring in 1983, but it wasn't the same. He was pitching as a bullpen. They didn't really use him that much. And then he got sober, and somehow his pitching slipped. And a lot of people in Baltimore said that he was better as an alcoholic. Yeah, right. But anyway, Baltimore didn't know anything. Montreal ended up getting Dennis Martinez. He slowly but surely built up a great career with the Expos. And of course, threw the perfect game. And he was such in high demand. In 1993, he almost was traded to the Atlanta Braves. The Braves were going to give a good player back. I can't remember who they were going to give back to the Expos. But Dennis Martinez waived it because of his veteran rights. And I believe he was on the 94 squad, right? No, he wasn't. I think he went to Cleveland. Nevertheless. Number 8, numero 8. Sean Dubois, right field, Larry Walker. I know Larry Walker also played first base for the Expos, but I remember him as a right fielder. And yeah, he's low on this list due to the fact that Larry Walker's moments were without the Expos. They were better off elsewhere. However, Larry Walker signed a small deal with the Montreal Expos for over 1,300 Canadian. He was built up in 1989. He was up with a big club even though that the Expos were fighting for the NL East and traded away Randy Johnson. How are we supposed to know how good Randy Johnson was after he left the Expos? Anyway, Walker was a consistent power and defensive threat for the Expos, getting multiple gold gloves, and could have won MVP a few times, especially in 1994 when the Expos were good enough to projectedly win 110 games, probably win the World Series, and give Canada the third straight World Series as the Blue Jays were back-to-back champs at the time. Walker did play first base. Walker was good. He was a good hitter. He was actually on the cover of Sports Illustrated, I think the Canada version, but yeah, it was big. And Larry Walker was a threat in the outfield with Marcus Grissom and Moises Alou. Everyone thought they had one of the best outfields in baseball. Grissom would be traded to Atlanta for Roberto Kelly. Moises Alou stayed on and then went to Florida. And then Larry Walker was apparently given a small contract or no contract by the Expos. And Walker moved on to Colorado, became an MVP in 1997, lost the Canadian Man of the Year to Jacques Villeneuve, and basically Walker being upset he lost to a machine. But yeah, Larry Walker did well for Colorado and St. Louis. So practically his stuff elsewhere puts him at number 8. Numero set. The lancer, number 7, the pitcher, Steve Rogers. Steve Rogers is the Expos' all-time wins leader. He was a staff ace in the late 70s, early 80s. He was good, a 5-time All-Star. He was clutch and all that. He was a bit moody, but we can forgive that by his pitching. One such massive example of Steve Rogers' pitching prowess was in 1981 when he twice faced Steve Carlton in the League Division Series against the Phillies. Of course, that was the byproduct of the strike in the middle of the season, and the Phillies being the first half AL East champions and the Expos being the second half NL East champions, and screwing over the St. Louis Cardinals in essence. But Cincinnati Reds fans can say, hold my beer, because in 1981 they were screwed out of the NL West thing. The Dodgers and Astros were there, but the Reds had the best record in baseball, much less. Anyway, Steve Rogers was a good player and all that. He beat Steve Carlton twice in that 5-game series between the Expos and the Phillies, and we all know he was the guy who came out of the bullpen and gave up Rick Monday's home run after 2 quick outs. I mean, the Expos were screwed. Jeff Reardon was injured. They could have taken Woody Fryman or Elias Sosa, but no, they went with Steve Rogers. And it cost them dearly. But Expo fans didn't really hate on Rogers for that. They hate on Rick Monday. Numero 6, number 6. Chantois, right field, Le Grand Orange, Rusty Staub. Rusty Staub was basically the Expos' first superstar. He was there from 1969 till, I think, 73, 72 or 73, can't remember. But Le Grand Orange was the first main leader for the Expos. He even endeared himself to the Montreal population by speaking French and trying to get to the Quebecois fan base in Montreal. And he did. He was amazing. He had strong offensive numbers in the early years of the franchise. Let's face it, Montreal's early years were terrible and all that. But most expansion teams are, except for the Diamondbacks. Nevertheless, Rusty Staub was great and all that. He bounced around with the Mets and the Tigers, and then in 1979, the Expos managed to pick him up. And in his first game back, his first at bat, there was a massive standing ovation in front of 48,000 fans. The fans loved Rusty Staub. It would have been amazing if he helped them win the 1979 NL East, which was the only way they were going to go to the playoffs. But yeah, he was big and all that, especially for the Mets as well, but still. Numero 5. Le Lancer, Pedro Martinez. So at number 5, we have Pedro Martinez. Great pitcher and all that. He started his career in the bullpen with the LA Dodgers. He was a beanpole, as they will. Tommy Lasorda didn't think he was going to amount to much, even though, he was Ramon Martinez's brother. And Ramon did throw a no-hitter in 1994. But Pedro was in such low demand that was the price that the Dodgers paid it in the 93 offseason to take Delino DeShields. They needed a second baseman. Jody Reed was going elsewhere. They needed a second baseman, and Delino DeShields was the main guy. So they traded Pedro to the Expos, and the fans went nuts for Montreal. LA didn't give a shit. Montreal did. They wanted Brochu. They wanted Dramovsky. They wanted the Brain Trust fired for this stupid move. However, Pedro in his first home start in 94 had a no-hitter going through 8 innings, but then he had to plunk Reggie Sanders and cause trouble. Pedro spent only 4 years with the Expos, 94 through 97, but it was in great demand. 95, he actually nearly threw a perfect game. It was unfortunately though the Expos couldn't score, so his 9 inning perfect game was not there. He gave up a double in the 10th. The Expos did win that game 1-0, but still amazing. And in 97, he outdueled Pat Hankin in that famous Montreal Toronto series in 97. The first time interleague was there. Pedro in 97 won the Cy Young, and then poof, he was gone. The Expos didn't have the money, so they had to trade him away. So Boston picked him up and giving up Carl Pavano and Tony Armas Jr., among others. Pavano was okay for the Marlins, and Tony Armas Jr. was okay for the Expos, but other than that, nothing. Yeah, Pedro was great for Boston, the Mets. Who else did he pitch for? I can't remember who else he pitched for. But yeah, Pedro was Pedro. And, the Expos were financially ruined in the mid 90s. That 94 strike cost them dearly. Numero 4, Jean Dubois, right field, Vladdy Guerrero. It's kind of weird how right field always gets the best players in Expos history. I mean, the top catcher in Expos history I'll talk about later. First base, like maybe Larry Walker. Second base, maybe Delano DeShields. Third base, we talked about Tim Wallach. Shortstop, I think was Grzelcyk. That's saying a lot. The outfield, we'll be talking about center field and left field. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, yeah, Vladdy Guerrero was a legend and all that. In 96, he came up from the minors and he hit his first home run against the Atlanta Braves in Atlanta in such a way that the pitch was outside the zone, and Pete Van Buren and Don Sutton talked about it at length for TBS. Anyway, Vladdy would hit his stride. In 2001, he famously threw out Alberto Castillo trying to go from second to home on a base hit, which was also that game when Jose Fedro hit the the 3-run home run off Billy Koch to tie the game before the Expos lost in the 11th. But yeah, Vladdy had that cannon of an arm. He had his hitting prowess. He swung at bad pitches, but he still was good. And the Guerrero pedigree was huge because Vladdy Jr. is an icon for the Blue Jays, even though he's having a terrible start to the 2026 season. But who doesn't? And then Vladdy, to add insult to injury, won the AL MVP in 2004 with the Angels, the very year that the Expos had to move to Washington. Numero 3, Chantois, gauche. Left field, Tim the Rock Raines. Tim Raines was a great leadoff hitter, a base stealer. Well, he was a 7-time All-Star, and he's in the Hall of Fame. What more do you want? However, Tim Raines' journey was big. In 1981, he came on the scene as a fresh-faced rookie, which was huge with the leadoff stuff and the base stealing. He was pretty good, and and he led off the Blue Monday game with a triple off Fernando Valenzuela and then got home on a double play. Regardless of that, Tim Raines was still a good player. However, in 1982, he actually openly admitted he was using cocaine and all that. He would keep a file in his pants, and his famous headfirst slide was only because he didn't want to break the fail of cocaine. Of course, Montreal in the 80s had a massive cocaine problem. Many players had indulged in this stuff. Montreal had Crescent Street, and it didn't work great. Of course, Alice Valentine's career was ruined by drugs and all that. And so was Tim Raines. But Tim Raines took the easy way out. He checked himself into rehab. He was a better player. And yeah, he was the man of the 80s for the Expos throughout the career before they got rid of him to the White Sox after 1990. So yeah, Tim Raines cleaned himself up. He got over 800 stolen bases in his career. He was still an icon. And don't you forget about that. Numero 2, Sean Santra. Number 2, center field, Andre the Hawk Dawson. So Andre Dawson, to me, was also good too. Yes, he won some honors outside of Montreal, but he was still a dynamic outfielder, a powerful bat, exceptional glove, and like many outfielders at the Expos, his career kind of was cut short due to the turf at Olympic Stadium, which was unforgiving. Anyway, Andre Dawson was a pretty good Expo and all that, number 10 in your programs. He was the man that helped the Expos out in the 80s and all that. He got his number retired by the Expos, if you will, alongside number 1. But yeah, Dawson was still a pretty good player. Unfortunately, though, collusion ruined him. He went to Cubs training camp with a blank check. They gave him $500,000, which seems like peanuts nowadays, obviously. But Dawson put up 49 home runs, helped the Cubs win a few games, not a lot. But then he got named MVP, and the Expo fans were pissed, I bet, with the whole collusion situation. But yeah, Andre Dawson would go on to play for Boston, Florida, and I think a team I'm missing. But anyway, Dawson was great for the Cubs, and he would have been much better if the Expos bothered to keep him. And number 1, I mean, come on, you really thought this guy wouldn't be number 1? It has to be the kid behind the plate, the wrestler, catcher, Gary Carter. Gary Carter was a great player for the Expos and all that. He actually was drafted out of high school. He almost went to UCLA to play quarterback for the UCLA Bruins, but the Expos were like, yeah, boy, nah, brah, we're going to put you in the major leagues. And what you did. He went to the major leagues. He actually ended up being an outfielder, but then that didn't work. But they put him behind the plate. He was a born leader. You know, he could call plays and all that. He was basically the heart of the Expos. He was pretty good and all that. One of the best catchers, if not the best catcher of the 1980s in the National League. I think that he's got come to like Ted Simmons and Johnny Bench. But still, Carter was a pretty good player. He could get hits when he needed to. And, you know, everyone loved him in Montreal. They were really devastated in 1984 when the Expos traded him to the Mets for Floyd Yeomans, Huey Brooks, and Herb Winningham. That trade was terrible because Winningham meant nothing. Yeomans flamed out, and Huey Brooks was serviceable, but still. Yeah, Carter ended up winning the title in 1986, taking it to Expo fans as per usual. Carter would go on to play on the West Coast with the Dodgers and the Giants. However, the Expos managed to pick him up for the 1992 season, and Carter did well. He played 95 games. He didn't have a good batting average, but he had that famous stumble over under the Hawk Dawson's head when the Expos were hosting the Cubs in 1992 in their last home game, and he went out with a bang. Gary Carter's death was shocking to a lot of Montreal fans and all that. Carter kept the faith that Montreal deserved better than what the ownership brought him. So yeah. So Gary Carter definitely is number 1 in my books. Really, he is. Anyway, thanks for watching. Adieu.